I'm Margaret Jay. I'm a member of the Advisory Council of the Museum of Prime Ministers. I think developing a Museum of the Prime Ministers is something which would really interest people. After all, we haven't got something which is specific about Prime Ministers in any of the historic environments which we have. I mean, many people, of course, have attachments to particular universities or particular constituencies or particular backgrounds where they came from, and therefore they perhaps have a local museum attached to them or something of that kind. But of course we've never had, because we haven't ever had a president, and therefore I think that's important to again emphasise that we do not have, as they have in the United States, particular museums devoted to individual presidencies. I think it's important that a museum of the Prime Ministers should be that, and not of a Prime Minister or a particular person. And I think a collective museum which talked about the office as much as the individuals and talked about the development of the way that the Prime Minister, as the leader of the government, the role changed through the times as they changed. I think that would be very significant and very helpful to people who were learning about British politics. I visited Downing Street a lot before my father became Prime Minister, because he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. And so we went in and out of Downing Street quite often. In fact, I went in and out of Downing Street more often when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. My sister moved into the house and with a friend of hers, so that was obviously important for her. And my brother was still around, but I of course had my own family and had been married for a good many years by the time my father became Prime Minister. So the impact on my personal life was pretty small, frankly. The surprising thing is that it appears to be, from the road, a fairly straightforward house, but of course it's a very complex series of offices and meeting rooms, as well as the upstairs flat, which used to be used always by the Prime Ministers, but isn't, of course, always now. Well, I expect people think it's much more glamorous than it is, because obviously the Prime Minister is the head of the government, and therefore you assume living in a situation which is very spectacular, but of course it's a working environment. 10 and 11 Downing Street are joined together internally, as you know, and therefore the two buildings are very much dominated by the work side, by the government side of the whole situation. So I suppose it isn't as glamorous as people would expect it to be, and it's very much a professional working environment with lots of offices, lots of people working very hard, and many long hours, and so on and so forth. It's not a palace. You are living above the shop, of course. I mean, you never get away from what's going on in your official life, as it were, because you're always on top of what's happening, and you only have to go downstairs to join in a meeting or something of that sort. So it isn't, in that sense, a very personal engagement with the house, but it's obviously so important in terms of it being the centre of government that you get used to that as part of your personal existence, I imagine. It's a very important historic setting, because it has all the various Prime Ministers' portraits on the wall, and so it's always something which television cameras and other people who are doing historic programmes and discussions about the history of Number 10 always cover, because there's every Prime Minister, as it were, up and down, up the stairs, and as you go up and down you see their portraits all the time. We did have some very good times at Chequers, because it was large enough for everyone to go there and stay. So we had Christmas times there, we had times there in the summer. There was plenty for the grandchildren to do, because of a marvellous swimming pool, lovely gardens, plenty of room to play for everybody. So it was a very enjoyable country house to live in as a visitor. And of course my parents spent a lot of time there. One of the things which was very nice was because it was a lovely, luxurious country house, which was a different experience for all of us. We could all have Christmas together, which was fun, which we used to do. I mean, I think one of the things that shows how much we all valued being at Chequers is there's a nice picture in my father's autobiography of all the family sitting on the steps in the Chequers garden in the bright sunshine in the summer, and I think that was very important to him. He was always quite a family person, and the fact that we could all spend time there together and enjoy the wonderful assets that were at Chequers was something that was valued both by him and by my mother, and of course by all of us, because we had memories of being in this historic surrounding. I remember a lot of very important things, and one of the, I think, historic mistakes about the way history and political analysts have talked about my father's time as Prime Minister was if it was only about crises. I mean, there were some very important positive things that happened during his time as Prime Minister, which I can remember and I feel very positively about, and I'm very pleased that they are remembered by people who are most interested in the Labour government, the Labour movement and politics in general. But as I say, there's so much emphasis on the crises which bookmarked his prime ministership in a sense that tends to distort what the real history was. I think there was very important work done internationally, particularly in the transatlantic world, that my father's relationship with the President of the United States, President Carter, and also with some of the European leaders like Helmut Schmidt, who was for a very long time the Chancellor of Germany, was extremely important in establishing a particular relationship between this country and both foreign diplomats, foreign governments and foreign affairs in general. I think he made some other very important initiatives. I mean, one which is still used a great deal when people talk about the education policy of various governments is the speech that he made at Ruskin when he was Prime Minister, which set in train a great number of the educational changes which have happened over the period since, and which were very much acknowledged as part of the Blair government when Tony Blair became Prime Minister, and were part of the whole work that someone like David Blunkett, who was a very well-known Secretary of State for Education, I don't know that he specifically looked back at the Ruskin speech and so on, but that was a very seminal point in education policy development. I think the world is so totally different, you see, and I think the way in which the whole situation about Number 10 and the Prime Ministers has developed has meant that much of the things that he valued and many of the ways in which he worked are no longer, as it were, part of the script. Well, I'm a constitutionalist. I know we don't have a written constitution in this country, but I think the constitutional framework which has persisted for most of our political history, which is that the Prime Minister is primus inter pares amongst ministers, that government is a collective responsibility, that we don't have a presidency, are things which he used to great effect when he was Prime Minister, particularly in achieving matters that were very important, like the general agreement on the IMF loan at the beginning of his prime ministership. That was done with a very effective form of collective discussion, collective cabinet decisions, collective agreement. And I don't think things work in that same way anymore, but I don't think necessarily have improved as a result. It was very nice of Tony to organise this party for my father's 90th birthday. I had left the government by then, so I wasn't in the government, but it was extremely enjoyable for my children and my various relations to come to that Number 10, because of course they, although the older ones had been there when my parents were there, the younger ones hadn't. So it was very enjoyable and a sort of amazing experience for them to be able to come to Number 10. And it was a special occasion because apart from my family and our family in the wider sense, there were a lot of people there who were really ex-colleagues of my father's, and people who at that stage, because it's now a very long time ago, were still alive to be able to enjoy a reunion. I admire very much what they did. My mother was a very important person who worked in the voluntary sector in the NHS for 13 years. She was the chair of the trustees of the Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital, which everybody thinks is a remarkable institution, and indeed it is. And she was very active in local politics. She was also a member of the London County Council. She was an alderman, as they were called, of the Greater London Council. So I think before me I had a picture that this was something which was valuable and useful to do, and you, in a sense, could contribute something to society, as well as getting an enormous amount of personal fulfilment from the work you did. And I think one of the advantages of being brought up in a political family and then doing a bit of politics yourself is the familiarity that you have with these things, which probably means that it becomes much more normal than you might expect if you were dropped in it from Mars or something. So it's a familiarity which is, of course, very valuable at one level, but you mustn't become over familiar and uninterested in it. When it was a question of being chair of the committee, but as it were, chair of the cabinet, primus inter pares, as the Constitution has developed, then I think it was something which involved a great deal of interpersonal connection, a great deal of being able to convince people individually that you were working all together, a great deal of sort of policy consensus, which might be hard fought. It might well be something which was developed out of very intense arguments, but in the end provided a collective leadership. I think particularly with the role of the media having changed and having become much more dominant in a sense, since we now have all of the, for example, 24-hour news, etc. I think that the role has become much more importantly one of communication. It was always one of communication. I mean, people in my father's generation went round and spoke at hundreds of face-to-face meetings and town hall gatherings and fairly hostile campaign trips and that sort of thing. It's now much more done through the electronic media, whether it's making a video or whether it's appearing on television or speaking indirectly or directly to the news cameras. And that, I think, is something which has obviously changed. I think that the whole issue about gender in politics, women in politics, has developed and luckily become far more acceptable. And it's interesting that we talk about Margaret Thatcher, for example, as being a woman's leader, but on the other hand, she had hardly any women in her government, virtually none in her cabinet. And I think one of the things which we did in the Blair government, which was to create a system whereby the Labour Party at least has all women shortlists in certain constituencies, has certainly enormously improved the division between the genders in the House of Commons, where the Labour Party, for example, now has an equal number of women MPs as male MPs, and I think that's been a very interesting development, but one that was in a sense created out of the much more emphasis on, as I said, women shortlists, which we did in the 90s, and that's led to the situation that there is today. I think there is now obviously every possible opportunity for a woman to take the top job. I mean, that isn't something which is thought of as even unusual, let alone unique. So I suspect that we will see several more, hopefully many more, in the years to come. I've had a rather varied career because I started off working for the BBC, of which I'm enormously proud. It is the most incredible institution and broadcaster in the world. I'm very glad that they're the only people in my whole career who've actually employed me. Which they did for 20 years, which was an enormously valuable experience. I then went on to do work in the charitable sector. I also had a lot of roles working with the NHS, being a member of local health authorities and that kind of thing, which was valuable in terms of learning about administration and also about the organisation of the health service.